The scent of scorched timber clung to me, a phantom limb of memory I couldn't amputate. It permeated my clothes, my skin, the very air I breathed in my small, rented room. Every morning I woke to it, a cruel reminder of the inferno that had consumed everything. 6 months. 6 months since the last shriek, the last desperate, muffled cry. 6 months since the house I had designed, the house I had poured my heart into, had become a tomb. I traced the rim of my cooling mug of tea, the ceramic rough beneath my thumb. The steam, once a comforting cloud, now seemed to dissipate into nothingness just like everything else. My life had shrunk to this. The quiet apartment, the endless cups of tea, the blueprints spread across my dining table that I never quite brought myself to touch. They were my penance, the lines and angles a constant accusation. I was an architect, yes, but what kind of architect builds a pyre for his own family? The guilt was a lead weight in my gut, a dull ache that never subsided. It was a constant companion, whispering questions in the dead of night. Could you have done more? Did you miss something? My wife, my children, their faces, once vivid and full of life, now flickered like dying embers in my mind. I saw them less clearly with each passing day, and that was the cruelest torture of all. It felt like I was losing them all over again. My days blurred into a monotonous cycle of self-imposed isolation. I avoided friends, ignored calls from concerned colleagues. Their well-meaning condolences felt like salt in an open wound, each word a fresh excavation of my grief. I preferred the silence, the quiet company of my own despair. At least it was honest. Then the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper, sealed with a wax emblem I didn't recognize. It bore a return address from a solicitor's office I'd never heard of, in a town I only vaguely knew existed, tucked away in a remote corner of the country. I opened it with a detached curiosity, expecting a bill or some forgotten legal formality. Instead, the words swam before my eyes, pulling me from my stupor. Regret to inform you of the passing of your great-aunt, Eleanor Vance, sole surviving heir, ancestral home, Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor. I had dismissed them as fanciful fabrications, never imagining such a place truly existed, let alone belonged to my family. And now it was mine. A week later, I stood before it. Blackwood Manor was not grand in the way I'd imagined, but imposing, yes. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, snaked across its facade, pulling at the mortar, obscuring windows that stared out like vacant eyes. The air here was different, to not just the crisp autumn bite, but something else. A musty, earthy smell, tinged with decay and something indefinably old. It felt like the house itself was breathing, a slow, heavy sigh. The solicitor, a thin, stooped woman with spectacles perched on her nose, handed me a heavy iron key. Her eyes held a flicker of something I couldn't quite place: pity, apprehension. "It's been empty for a very long time, Mr. Raj," he'd said, his voice hushed. "Almost 50 years, your great-aunt was particular. She kept no staff. Preferred her solitude." Solitude. I understood that. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight that pierced the grime-caked windows. My footsteps echoed, each sound amplifying the vast emptiness. This was not a fresh start, I realized, not in the way I'd hoped. This was merely a different kind of ending, a new heavy burden. I began to explore, driven by a strange, restless energy. Room after room, each cloaked in a shroud of white dust sheets, revealed forgotten furniture, faded tapestries, and the ghosts of a life I knew nothing about. My determination, a fragile shield against the encroaching despair, urged me forward. I needed to understand this place to tame it, just as I had once tried to tame the chaotic lines of a blueprint. Down a narrow, unlit passage, I found it. My breath plumed. I flicked on my phone's flashlight. This was a service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip echoed unnervingly, each drop landing with an exaggerated plink in some unseen puddle. The pipes overhead were wrapped in decaying insulation, some sections exposed, weeping tiny beads of condensation. I took a step, then another. The corridor twisted, disappearing into absolute blackness beyond the reach of my light. The drip, drip, drip seemed to quicken, or perhaps it was just my own pulse accelerating. I strained my ears, holding my breath. Nothing, what else lay hidden within these walls? Solitude. I understood that. The heavy oak door groaned open, releasing a wave of cold, stagnant air. The grand entrance hall was cavernous, the silence absolute save for the faint creaks and groans of settling wood and stone. The air smelled of damp earth and forgotten things, a musty perfume that clung to my clothes as I stepped across the threshold. This was it then. The ancestral home, my fresh start. Or perhaps my next ending. I dragged my few boxes inside, the cardboard scraping against the aged marble floor. Each sound echoed, amplified by the emptiness, making the space feel even larger, more imposing. The furniture, draped in white sheets like ghosts awaiting resurrection, stood sentinel in the periphery. I didn't bother with them, not yet. My focus was on finding a single livable room, a small island of normalcy in this sea of inherited decay. I bypassed them both, my footsteps echoing a lonely rhythm as I ascended the wide, curving staircase. I traced the intricate carvings with my fingertips, feeling the history embedded in every groove. Up here, the light was even dimmer, filtered through stained glass windows depicting scenes I couldn't quite discern through the grime. I chose a room at the end of the main corridor, one that faced east, hoping for morning sun. It was smaller than the others, less grand, which somehow made it feel more approachable. A thin layer of dust coated everything. I set down my rucksack and a box of essentials, a few clothes, a toothbrush, a battered copy of a classic novel I'd never finished. As I began to unpack, a sound drifted up from below. A soft scrape like wood against stone, or perhaps something heavier being dragged. I froze, my hand hovering over a folded shirt. The house had settled earlier, but this was different. It held a deliberate quality, a slow, methodical movement. Nothing. I shook my head, dismissing it as the house, just the house. Old buildings made noises, I knew that. I spent the next hour cleaning, or rather attempting to. The dust was an ancient enemy, ingrained in the very fabric of the place. I found a bucket and a threadbare cloth in a forgotten pantry, the water from the tap running a rusty brown before clearing to a frigid stream. Later, as twilight bled through the dirty windows, painting the grand hall in hues of bruised purple and gray, I ventured downstairs again. My stomach rumbled, a stark reminder of the long journey and the meager meal I'd had. I needed to find the kitchen, or at least a working outlet for the small electric kettle I'd brought. The house groaned around me, a symphony of creaks and sighs that I was starting to grow accustomed to. My hand reached for the light switch, but the switch itself was a relic, crumbling at my touch. I stepped into a narrow, winding space. This was the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. Overhead, a labyrinth of thick, corroded pipes crisscrossed the low ceiling, their surfaces beaded with condensation. The incessant drip, drip, drip of water echoed around me, a mournful, rhythmic sound that seemed to absorb all other noise. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant water, a cloying scent that caught in my throat. My breath plumed again, more noticeably this time. The corridor stretched further than I anticipated, twisting out of sight. I took another step, my boots crunching on something gritty beneath my feet. The pipes above me seemed to sigh, a long, drawn-out exhalation that wasn't quite a creak, not quite a groan. It sounded almost wet. The dripping intensified for a moment, then settled back into its monotonous rhythm. Had I imagined that sigh, or was the house truly beginning to awaken around me? The grand entrance hall yawned before me, swallowing the faint echoes of my own breath. The silence was a heavy blanket, thick with dust and the scent of aged wood and something else, something faintly metallic like old blood or forgotten machinery. I ran a hand over the cold marble banister, the chill seeping into my fingertips. This house, my ancestral home, was a mausoleum of memories I didn't possess, yet somehow I felt their weight. I tried to focus on the structure, the solid architecture I understood, to ground myself. The intricate carvings on the newel posts, the soaring ceilings, the stained glass panels depicting scenes I couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. It was magnificent in a decaying sort of way and utterly overwhelming. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, dragging my meager luggage into what I hoped would become my bedroom. It was a large room on the second floor, overlooking a tangle of overgrown gardens. The windows, thick with grime, filtered the afternoon sun into weak, watery shafts. I wiped at pane with my sleeve, revealing a sliver of gray sky. The air in the room was stale, but not quite as heavy as the hall. I started to unpack, laying out clothes in a wardrobe that smelled of mothballs and cedar. The mundane act was a comfort, a small assertion of control in a place that felt so vast and untamed. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and oranges, the creaks and groans of the house seemed to intensify. I rationalized them as the natural settling of an old structure, the wind finding its way through loose panes, the timbers expanding and contracting with the cooling air. But then I heard it, a distinct thump from the floor below, followed by a faint, grating scrape. It wasn't the rhythmic groan of wood. It was sharper, more deliberate. My hand froze midair, a shirt half folded. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear over the sudden, frantic beat of my own heart. Nothing, only the wind whistling a mournful tune outside. "Just the house," I murmured, the words feeling thin and unconvincing in the quiet. I forced myself to finish unpacking, to arrange my few books on a dusty shelf. I even tried to read, but the words blurred, my mind snagged on every whisper of the wind. every distant rustle. The next morning, the unease lingered like a phantom limb. My breath plumed in front of me. I pulled on a thick jumper, my teeth chattering, and decided to explore. I wandered through silent drawing rooms with shrouded furniture, a vast dining room where a single crystal chandelier hung precariously, and a library filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and forgotten knowledge. It was when I ventured towards the rear of the house, following a narrow, unlit passage, that I heard it again. A persistent, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. It wasn't the gentle patter of rain outside. It was too regular, too metallic. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something acrid, almost coppery. Then the passage narrowed further, twisting sharply to the left. I squinted into the gloom, my eyes struggling to adjust. A faint, greenish light seemed to emanate from somewhere ahead. The dripping sound grew louder, more insistent, echoing off unseen surfaces. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to find a logical source for these disturbances, propelled me forward. I pushed through a heavy, unadorned wooden door that hung slightly ajar, its surface rough and splintered. I stepped into the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The air was thick with condensation, clinging to my clothes, raising goosebumps on my arms. Water ran in rivulets down the exposed brick walls, collecting in shallow puddles on the uneven stone floor. Overhead, a tangle of corroded copper pipes snaked across the low ceiling, some weeping slow, deliberate tears onto the floor below. The greenish light I'd seen earlier wasn't a light source at all. It was moss, luminescent in the pervasive damp, clinging to the grimy walls. The space felt claustrophobic, pressing in on me from all sides. Each drip echoed, magnified, until it felt like a hammer striking an anvil inside my skull. The coppery smell was stronger here, almost overwhelming. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and bitter. My gaze swept across the corridor, searching for the source of the persistent dripping that had drawn me here. It wasn't just one pipe, it was several, a chorus of tiny, metallic sounds. But then I saw it. It wasn't a pipe. It was too regular, too distinct. My breath hitched. Beneath the verdant shroud, embedded in the brick, was an old, tarnished brass plaque. It was small, no bigger than my palm, and so encrusted with grime and corrosion that its details were almost entirely obscured. I scraped at it with my fingernail, dislodging flakes of rust and dirt. As more of the surface was revealed, I saw not a name or a date, but a symbol. It was crudely etched, a series of interlocking, irregular lines forming what looked like a distorted, screaming face. It wasn't just a symbol, it felt like a warning. A sudden, sharp clang echoed down the corridor right behind me. It sounded like metal striking stone, loud enough to make me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I spun around, my eyes wide, searching the gloom. Had I imagined the sound, or was something else here, watching me, waiting in the damp, lightless depths of this forgotten passage? Cold marble banister, the chill seeping into my fingertips. The grandeur felt less inviting now, more like a meticulously crafted cage. My initial awe had curdled into something colder, a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with the temperature of the stone. "No," I muttered, the sound swallowed instantly. My architect's brain, the one that had designed towering structures and intricate homes, refused to accept vague feelings. There had to be a logical explanation for the unsettling atmosphere. This was an old house, yes, but even old houses adhered to physics. Gravity, decay, settling foundations, these were things I understood. These were things I could measure, quantify, fix. Determination hardened my resolve. I'd approach this like any other structural assessment, albeit one with a significantly higher creep factor. I started in the grand hall, my eyes tracing every line, every joint. The ceiling soared, a masterpiece of carved wood and plasterwork, but my gaze was drawn to the subtle discrepancies. A hairline crack spiderwebbing from an archway, a slight sag in a support beam that suggested a deeper issue, not just cosmetic damage. My fingers probed the rough plaster, feeling the minute vibrations of the house itself, a low, almost imperceptible hum that resonated in my bones. The house was a labyrinth of forgotten spaces. Beyond the opulent reception rooms and the sprawling library, I found myself in a network of less frequented areas. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing grimy windows, illuminating forgotten furniture draped in white sheets like silent, ghostly figures. The air grew heavier here, thick with the scent of mildew and something else, a dry, papery smell, like ancient secrets crumbling into dust. I ran my hand along a wall, the wallpaper peeling in brittle strips, revealing layers of past designs, each one a relic of another era. My architectural training kicked in, a familiar comfort in the face of the unknown. I wasn't just looking at decoration. I was seeing the bones of the structure, the way it had been built, altered, and rebuilt over generations. It felt less like an absence of sound and more like a presence, something holding its breath, listening with me. In a narrow, unlit hallway off what appeared to be the old servants' quarters, I found it a section of wall that simply didn't make sense. The plasterwork, while old, was subtly different, a shade too smooth, a texture too uniform compared to the surrounding crumbling facade. The baseboards didn't quite align. It was a detail so minute, so deliberate, it screamed hidden. My heart gave a sudden, sharp lurch, but my determination held. This was it, a structural anomaly, a secret. With a controlled tap, I struck the wall. The sound was flat, dull, distinctly different from the solid thud of the brickwork nearby. My breath hitched. I worked quickly, carefully, chipping away at the plaster. Dust plumed, stinging my eyes, but I pressed on. Beneath the surface, not brick, but a thin, rough wooden panel was revealed, seamlessly integrated into the wall. It had been meticulously disguised, painted over countless times. My hands, guided by instinct, found a faint seam, a tiny, almost invisible crack running vertically down the center. I pushed, pulled, prodded. My flashlight beam cut through the absolute blackness, revealing a narrow passage, a service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The floor was slick with moisture, and the air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me. The absence of surveillance, a detail I registered instantly, felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate choice. I stepped inside, my shoes squelching softly on the damp floor. The corridor was barely wide enough for my shoulders, forcing me to turn sideways in places. The flashlight beam danced ahead, revealing walls that were not plaster or brick but rough-hewn stone, sweating with condensation. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, a taste on my tongue. It wasn't just old blood, it was something sharper, almost electrical, yet organic. My skin crawled. Then my light caught something on the wall, not an etching, not a carving, but something embedded into the stone itself. They pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, a sickly greenish glow that barely penetrated the gloom. And beneath them, carefully arranged on a small, damp shelf carved into the rock, were objects. Not artifacts, not treasures. These were personal effects. A tarnished silver locket, its chain broken. A child's wooden toy soldier missing an arm. A yellowed photograph, its faces obscured by mold, but the shape of a family group still discernible. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't just forgotten things, they felt like offerings. My eyes darted around the confined space, the dripping pipes, the pulsating growths, the silent offerings. This wasn't a hidden passageway for servants. This was a place of deliberate collection, of careful arrangement. What was this place? And what exactly was it collecting? Distinctly different from the solid, reassuring plaster of the surrounding wall. My breath caught, a cold knot tightening in my chest. This wasn't a structural beam, nor was it a simple void. I tapped again, a little harder this time. My determination, a fragile shield against the creeping unease, hardened. There was something here, something hidden. Setting the hammer aside, I retrieved a utility knife from my belt, the blade glinting faintly in the weak light filtering through the high window. Carefully, I began to score the plaster, following the faint outline of what felt like a seam. Dust motes danced in the air, catching the light like tiny, frantic spirits. The plaster flaked away, revealing not brick but a thin, rough-hewn wooden panel. With a final, decisive cut, I pried at the edge. The wood groaned, a sound like an old man clearing his throat, and then with a soft thud, a section of the panel swung inward. A gust of stale, cloying air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else. A faint metallic tang, like old coins left in a forgotten drawer. Beyond the opening lay a narrow, claustrophobic passage. This was the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras I'd been told about, a hidden vein of the house, a place designed to be unseen. My flashlight beam cut through the absolute blackness, revealing a low ceiling, rough stone walls, and a tangle of aged pipes snaking along the upper reaches, their rusty surfaces weeping slow, rhythmic droplets onto the dirt floor. Plink, plink. There was no light source here, no windows, no electrical wiring beyond the ancient corroded pipes. And as the description had promised, no cameras, total isolation, a perfect place to hide things, or perhaps to hide from things. I squeezed through the opening, my shoulders brushing against the rough stone. The space was barely wide enough for me to turn, and the ceiling pressed low, forcing me to hunch. My light swept the corridor. The pipes overhead hummed faintly, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that I felt more than heard, a constant, unsettling pulse. My boots sank slightly into the soft, damp earth with each step. The corridor felt like a forgotten tomb, a place where time itself had stagnated. My senses were on high alert. Every drip, every faint creak of the old house settling above was magnified. I could feel the hairs on my arms prickle, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back, but the architect in me, the part that craved answers, pushed me forward. Then I saw it. It looked out of place, not part of the house's structure, but something left behind, abandoned. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. The wood was rough under my fingers, the metal clasp corroded. With a gentle tug, it opened, revealing a collection of yellowed papers, faded photographs, and a small porcelain doll with one vacant eye socket. The smell of old paper and dust was overwhelming. I pulled out a sheaf of letters first, their cursive script delicate and faded. They spoke of love, then of loss, of a child's illness, and then, heartbreakingly, of a child's death. The grief in the words was palpable, seeping off the pages like a stain. I saw dates spanning decades, showing a family's descent into despair, culminating in a final, frantic entry that spoke of an unbearable sorrow, a guilt over perceived failures, a sense of being trapped. Then the photographs, faces blurred by time and water damage, but still conveying an underlying sadness. A young couple, once smiling, slowly morphing into gaunt, haunted figures. A child, vibrant in one picture, then pale and frail in the next. And finally, a single photograph, crumpled and torn, of a woman staring directly into the lens, her eyes wide with an anguish that made my own throat tighten. Her face, even through the decades, held a striking resemblance to the woman from the portrait I'd found earlier. The previous inhabitant, the one who had vanished. My hands trembled as I sifted through the remaining items. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings broken. A lock of hair, tied with a faded ribbon. Each item a tiny shard of a broken life, each imbued with an unbearable weight of sorrow. And then at the very bottom, a small, leather-bound journal. The entries were sporadic, written in a shaky hand. The early pages spoke of a mother's love, a father's pride. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The handwriting became erratic, the words desperate. "It feeds," one entry screamed, almost illegible. "It thrives on the tears, on the gnawing regret. It wants the emptiness, the hole where joy used to be." My breath hitched. My own emptiness, my own gnawing regret. The guilt that had been a constant companion since the fire. This house. It wasn't just old, it was hungry. It didn't just hold grief, it cultivated it. It was a predator, and the inhabitants, myself included, were its prey. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The deaths, the disappearances, the unending sorrow that had clung to this place like a shroud, it wasn't just a string of tragedies. It was a harvest. This entity, whatever it was, had been feeding on the anguish of generations, growing stronger with each broken heart, each tear shed in the very rooms I now walked. It had drawn me here, a man steeped in guilt, a man drowning in grief, a perfect, ripe fruit for its consumption. A sudden, sharp, metallic clang echoed from deeper within the service corridor, followed by a soft, slithering sound that seemed to scrape against the very stone. My heart hammered. Had I just opened a door, not just to the past, but to something else entirely? The air in the library still vibrated with the truth, a low hum that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just an old house. It was a living maw, a trap baited with sorrow, my grief, my guilt. It had been feeding on me, growing stronger with every memory, every whisper of my family's names. The realization had struck me with the force of a physical blow, leaving me gasping, but now a different sensation took hold. A cold, hard resolve. I had to get out. I didn't waste another second. My mind, usually a labyrinth of what-ifs and if-onlys, snapped into sharp focus. Survival, that was the only if that mattered now. My backpack, still packed with essentials from my journey, lay discarded in the foyer. I snatched it up, the weight of it a small comfort. My phone, my wallet, my keys all there. I wasn't leaving without them. The front door. It was the most obvious exit, the most direct path to freedom. It turned with a groan, the latch clicking open. I pulled. The door moved a fraction of an inch, then snagged. I pulled harder, leaning my weight into it. It groaned, protested, but wouldn't budge further. It was as if something heavy had been placed against the other side, or the frame itself had warped overnight. I strained, muscles burning, but the gap remained stubbornly narrow, barely wide enough to show a sliver of the overgrown garden beyond. The wood felt resistant, alive, pushing back against my efforts. I let go, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The front door was sealed. I moved to the nearest window, a tall bay window overlooking the crumbling fountain. The latches were stiff, crusted with age, but I forced them open. I pushed on the sash. It didn't lift. I tried another, then another, moving through the ground floor, each attempt met with the same unyielding resistance. It wasn't just old age, it felt deliberate. The windows were sealed, painted shut by an invisible hand, or perhaps the house itself had simply decided they wouldn't open. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I needed an alternative, a back door, a service entrance, anything. I remembered seeing a narrow, unassuming door tucked away near the kitchen, almost hidden behind a pantry. It led, I vaguely recalled, to a less-used part of the house, a network of utility passages. It was my only option. The pantry door was ajar. Behind it, as I'd remembered, was the small, unpainted door. It turned easily, a soft click echoing in the sudden stillness. I pushed it open. A gust of air, damp and thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, hit me. Before me stretched the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The air was heavy, clinging to my skin like a shroud. Plink, 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 plonk. The sound was maddening, each drop a tiny hammer blow against my fraying nerves. The only light came from the sliver spilling from the kitchen door behind me. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam a weak, trembling spear against the encroaching gloom. The light revealed more pipes, smaller ones branching off like veins, disappearing into the walls. The floor sloped gently downwards, slick underfoot, coated in a fine layer of grit and grime. I took a tentative step, then another. No answer, only the relentless dripping. This had to lead somewhere, an exterior door, a basement window, something. The corridor twisted, then turned sharply to the left. As I rounded the corner, my phone beam cut through the blackness, revealing a solid steel door at the very end of the passage, perhaps 30 feet away. Hope surged, potent and intoxicating. I quickened my pace, my boots squelching softly on the wet concrete. Almost there, almost out. Then, a low groan resonated through the pipes directly above my head. It wasn't the sound of straining metal. It was something deeper, a resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the house. The dripping stopped abruptly. My heart seized. I stopped dead, my flashlight beam wavering. The steel door at the end of the corridor, my beacon of escape, began to glow faintly from within, a sickly, pulsing red. It wasn't reflecting light, it was emitting it. The red deepened, throbbing like a diseased heart. Then, with a slow, agonizing grind of metal against stone, the door began to recede into the wall, not opening, but sinking, dissolving as if absorbed by the brickwork around it. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was physically disappearing. My throat tightened. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The steel door, my only visible way out, vanished entirely, leaving behind nothing but a seamless expanse of damp brick wall. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, scrambling to regain my balance. My breath hitched. The air was now impossibly heavy, pressing down on me, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. The temperature plummeted further, a sudden, unnatural drop that felt like an icy hand closing around my chest. I could see my breath in thick plumes. Then the pipes above me began to hum. Not just vibrate, but sing, a low, guttural note that resonated through my skull. It wasn't words, not exactly, but a cacophony of mournful sighs, desperate pleas, and guttural snarls, all tinged with an unbearable sorrow. It was the sound of 1,000 broken hearts, echoing within the confines of this damp, pipe-laden tomb. I pressed myself against the brick wall, my entire body trembling, my head throbbing with the sound. This wasn't just a house, it was a cage, and I was trapped. How could I possibly escape something that could simply unmake a door? My grief, my guilt. The realization had punched the air from my lungs, leaving me hollowed out, but something else had filled the void, a cold, hard resolve. I wouldn't be Emile, not again. I spent the next hours tearing through the house, not searching for an exit, but for an answer. The grandiosity of the place, the heavy tapestries, the ornate carvings, they all felt like a deliberate facade now, a gilded cage. I ran my hands along the cold stone walls, pressing, knocking, listening for anything hollow. The old maps, the family trees, the dusty journals I'd found earlier, they were all pieces, but they didn't connect. Not fully. There was a missing link, something deliberately hidden. My search led me down to the basement, a place I'd avoided since finding those unsettling symbols. The air grew heavier with each step down the crumbling stone stairs, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic like old blood. My breath hitched. The main cellar was a cavern of forgotten things. Broken furniture, rusted tools, crates of bottled preserves long turned to vinegar. But I wasn't interested in any of that. I needed what lay beneath the surface. I remembered a small, crude drawing in one of the ancestors' journals, a sketch of a distorted symbol with an arrow pointing downward, almost hidden in the margin. It wasn't on the main floor plans. I scanned the walls, running my fingers over the rough-hewn stones, feeling for a seam, a difference in texture. The metallic tang in the air intensified, stinging my nostrils. Then near what looked like an old coal chute, I found it. A faint line, barely visible, running vertically down the wall. It wasn't a crack, it was a gap. I pushed, then pulled. Nothing. I braced my shoulder against the wall, grunting with effort, and shoved. A low groan echoed through the basement, not from me, but from the stone itself. The section of the wall scraped inward, then swung open with a grinding sigh, revealing a narrow, unlit passage. The opening led into a service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The air was a suffocating blend of stale water, rust, and something else, something fetid and ancient that made the back of my throat clench. Water slicked the floor, reflecting the shaky beam of my flashlight in broken shards. The pipes overhead, thick with corrosion, wept steadily, each drop echoing like a distant heartbeat. The walls here were rough, unfinished stone, unlike the more refined masonry of the main house. This was the guts of the place, hidden away, forgotten. I stepped inside, the stone slab creaking shut behind me with a final, sickening thud. The sound reverberated, then faded, leaving only the relentless drip, drip, drip. No cameras, no eyes, just me and whatever lay hidden in the damp stone. I moved slowly, my boots splashing through the shallow puddles. The corridor twisted and turned, seemingly without purpose, a maze designed to disorient. It felt like walking through the veins of a dying beast. Then I saw it. Not another passage, but a recessed alcove barely larger than a coffin. Inside, bathed in the weak glow of my flashlight, were not pipes, but a collection of objects, an altar almost. A crude wooden box bound with rusted iron bands. Beside it, a stack of brittle, leather-bound ledgers, their pages yellowed and warped. My hands trembled as I reached for the ledgers. I opened the first one. The script was archaic, an ancestor's hand, dense with cryptic symbols and florid language. The entry spoke of a gift, a blessing given to the family generations ago, a bond forged in blood and despair. It wasn't a blessing. It was a bargain. My ancestors, in their ambition, their desire for power and prosperity, had made a pact. They had discovered something ancient, something that slumbered beneath the very foundations of this land, and they had woken it. The entity. It didn't just feed on grief and guilt, it demanded it. It was a parasitic force woven into the very fabric of my bloodline. The ledgers detailed offerings not of material wealth, but of profound sorrow, of crushing remorse. Each generation had contributed, whether knowingly or not. Not just ambition, but outright cruelty, engineered to produce the perfect emotional harvest. My family hadn't been cursed, they had been its custodians, its farmers. And I, Raj, with my architect's guilt, my vivid memories of fire and ash and loss, was not just a victim who had stumbled into its maw. I was the culmination, the chosen sacrifice. The perfect meal ripe for the taking, prepared by generations of my own blood. My inheritance wasn't a house, it was a death sentence. The final entry in the last ledger, scrawled in a shaky hand, confirmed it. The architect, the one who builds and destroys, bears the heaviest burden. His grief will be the feast. My breath caught in my throat. The dripping pipes seemed to quicken, a drumbeat for my impending doom. I wasn't just fighting a ghost. I was fighting my lineage, a monster nurtured by my own family. How could I escape something that had been bred for me, chosen for me by those who shared my name? What had they done, and what did it want from me now that I knew? This isn't an escape, I told myself, my voice a ragged whisper in the cold, close air of the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. This is a stand. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of my victimhood. All this time I had reacted, fled, cowered. But the house, the entity, my family's cursed legacy, it had cornered me. There was no more running. The air in the narrow passage was thick with the smell of damp earth and stale metal, clinging to my clothes, chilling my skin. Rust bloomed in angry orange patches along the iron conduits that crisscrossed above me, each drip from them echoing like a distant hammer blow. I could feel the clammy slickness on the concrete floor beneath my worn boots, a constant reminder of the house's decay. My fingers, numb with a mix of fear and resolve, traced the cold, rough surface of the wall. I needed to know, I needed to understand. My ancestors had built this, designed it, invited it. There had to be a flaw, a weakness, a way to fight back embedded within its very structure or its forgotten history. I pushed forward, the beam of my light dancing over cobweb-draped corners and the silent, gaping mouths of old ventilation shafts. Each step was deliberate, no longer a panic scramble. Not this time. My mind raced, connecting fragments. The strange symbols in the old ledger, the peculiar layout of certain rooms, the sealed-off passages I'd glimpsed on the original blueprints. They weren't random. They were deliberate. This wasn't just a house. It was a mechanism, a trap, perhaps even a cage. If my family had built a cage, they must have known how to open it. I stumbled out of the service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras, and into a slightly wider, equally disused basement area. My heart gave a strange lurch. This felt significant. With a grunt, I forced the heavy lid open. Inside, beneath layers of musty linen, lay a collection of bound journals, their leather covers cracked and brittle. My hands trembled as I pulled one out. The script inside was an elegant, looping hand, faded but still legible. It was the handwriting of my great-grandfather, the one who had made significant alterations to the house in the early 20th century. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning for anything that made sense. Most entries were mundane, detailing finances, weather, local events. But then the tone shifted. The handwriting became more frantic, the lines less even. There were sketches, crude but recognizable, of the house's layout, overlaid with strange symbols I'd seen before on the old ledger on the hidden brickwork. And then a passage dated exactly a century ago. The architect's folly. He built not a home but a vessel, a conduit. It feeds, yes, but it binds. Its strength is its dependence. To sever the connection, one must understand the foundation, not stone and mortar, but the truth of its nature. The heart of the construct, it must be starved. What did that mean? Not grief, but the source of grief. My family's guilt, my own guilt. Could the house truly be a vessel, and the entity something contained within it, rather than simply haunting it? I continued to read, my eyes devouring the desperate scrawl. Another entry weeks later. The ritual of severance. The old texts speak of it, a counter-design, a reversal. It requires a catalyst, something from within, a bloodline, a sacrifice, a mirror. A mirror, my mind reeled, a sacrifice. My family had designed this horror, nurtured it, and then tried to fight it. They had found a way, or at least hints of one. The journal didn't give me all the answers, but it gave me a direction. It hinted at a specific ritual, a counter-design, something to reverse the entity's power. But what catalyst did it speak of, and what exactly did a mirror imply? The journal lay open on the desk, its brittle pages whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. A mirror. A sacrifice. My family, architects of this horror, had also been its victims, or so I had always believed. But the script in the leather-bound book, the hurried, frantic scrawl of my great-grandfather, suggested a different narrative. They hadn't just been victims, they had been fighters. They had sought a counter-design, a way to sever the parasitic bond this house had forged with my lineage. The mention of a mirror of reflection and a sacrifice of self burrowed into my mind, twisting the familiar into something monstrously new. It wasn't about someone else's reflection, nor another's life. It was about mine. A specific passage, underlined multiple times, spoke of the hidden artery where the house breathes its sickness. It pointed not to a grand hall or a forgotten attic, but to the utilitarian veins of the structure. I knew exactly where that meant. The service corridors, the unseen pathways beneath the floorboards and behind the plaster. The parts of the house that had no business being beautiful, no purpose beyond function. My flashlight beam cut a shivering path through the suffocating gloom as I descended a narrow, rusting iron staircase hidden behind a pantry shelf. The air grew thick and heavy with the scent of damp earth and stagnant water, a metallic tang clinging to the back of my throat. Each step echoed, a hollow clang swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence. I pushed through a warped wooden door, its hinges groaning like tortured souls, and stepped into the service corridor. Pipes dripping, no cameras. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture, and a network of thick, corroded pipes ran overhead, a constant, irritating chorus of drips echoing through the confined space. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop seemed to land with deliberate intent, counting down to something I couldn't comprehend. No cameras, the journal had insisted. A blind spot. A place where the entity's pervasive gaze supposedly faltered. But I still felt watched. Every creak of the old pipes, every distant murmur of the house settling felt like an eye blinking open. I moved slowly, my boots scuffing on the uneven floor, a gritty mix of dust and what felt like fine, dry soil. My breath hitched in my chest. Then I heard it, not the drips, but something else. A low, rhythmic rasping. It wasn't mechanical, it was biological. A wet, guttural sound, like someone trying to clear their throat over and over. A voice, hoarse and broken, mumbling unintelligible words. I froze, my flashlight beam trembling. The rasping stopped. Only the drips remained, a relentless percussion. I held my breath, listening, my ears straining for any sign of movement. Was it the entity manifesting, or something else, something tangible? Hello? My voice was a reedy croak, barely audible above the drumming in my ears. Then a shuffle, a drag, and the rasping began again, closer this time, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic clink. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my grip tight. Rounding a bend in the corridor, the beam fell upon him. He was an old man, stooped and frail, dressed in what looked like the tattered remnants of a groundskeeper's uniform, faded overalls. A dirt-stained cap pulled low over his eyes. He knelt on the floor, surrounded by a scatter of broken glass and tarnished silver, meticulously polishing a jagged shard of obsidian. The clink was the obsidian tapping against the stone floor. His face, when he slowly lifted it, was a roadmap of despair. It needs to see itself, needs to eat, always hungry. He rasped, his voice like gravel. He didn't seem surprised to see me, only mildly distracted. They tried to starve it. Fool's errand. This was no ally. This was a pawn, a broken instrument. Who are I? I managed, my voice still thin. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The old custodian, been here longer than the house remembers. Saw them try to fight it, saw them feed it, saw them become it. He gestured vaguely at the obsidian shard in his hand. They thought a mirror, a way to turn its gaze back. But the mirror, it just shows what's already there. The grief, the guilt, the cracks in my soul, to break the loop. But I can't break what's already broken. I can only replace it. Replace it, my mind reeled. This wasn't what the journal implied. The old custodian's words twisted the counter-design into something far more insidious, more terrifying. If the entity fed on my reflection, on my grief, on my guilt, what did replace it even mean? Replace it. The old custodian's words echoed in the hollow space behind my eyes, a chilling counterpoint to the journal's vague promise of a counter-design. What had I misunderstood? My family's trial, he'd called it. Not a test of endurance, but a gruesome, deliberate act. If the entity, this thing I'd been trying to starve, truly fed on my reflection, on my grief, on the corrosive acid of my guilt, then replace it wasn't about the house. It was about me. A cold certainty settled in my chest, a lead weight that refused to be dislodged. There was no escape. The house wouldn't let me go, not while it still had a feast. The only way out was through. I had to go deeper, to the true heart of this decaying organism, to whatever vile chamber the entity called its own. The journal, for all its omissions, had hinted at a hidden passage, a service route for the house's forgotten mechanics, a place that even the original architect had sealed away, a place not meant for living eyes. My flashlight beam cut a wavering path through the dust motes dancing in the stale air of the upper landing. I found the latch behind a warped panel in the wall, tucked away behind a stack of brittle, forgotten blueprints, my own father's meticulous hand, ironically. The wood groaned as I forced it open, revealing a narrow, vertical shaft plunging into blackness. The smell hit me first, damp earth, mildew, and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet, like stagnant blood. I swallowed, the sound loud in my ears. This was it. The descent. The ladder was made of rusted iron rungs, slick with condensation. Each grip sent a shiver up my arm, not just from the cold metal, but from the raw knowledge of where I was headed. The air grew heavier with every rung I descended, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I could hear it now distinctly, the sound of water, dripping. I reached a small landing, barely wide enough for me to turn. My flashlight beam pierced the gloom, revealing a low, arched doorway. This wasn't a cellar. This was something else. I was in a service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The air was thick here, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something acrid and chemical like old battery acid. Water pooled in shallow depressions on the floor, reflecting the weak light of my beam like fractured mirrors. The pipes overhead, a tangled web of corroded copper and iron, wept continuously, each drop adding to the symphony of dampness. The sound was relentless, an insistent rhythm that slowly began to grate on my nerves, a metronome counting down to. What? The corridor stretched on, a claustrophobic tunnel seemingly without end. I started to hear other things too, or thought I did. A low, guttural sigh that seemed to emanate from the very walls. My breathing hitched. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady drip of the pipes. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, forcing myself to push past the rising panic. This was what it wanted. My fear. My guilt. It was already trying to consume me, even before I reached its lair. I opened my eyes, determination hardening my jaw. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction, not anymore. The corridor finally opened into a wider space, a cavernous chamber that dwarfed the narrow passage. The dripping sounds intensified, multiplied, echoing from unseen crevices in the stone. But I could see shapes now. Massive, ancient-looking machinery, rusted and inert, loomed in the periphery, their silent forms like hulking beasts. This wasn't just a service area, it was an engine room perhaps for some forgotten, monstrous purpose. And then I saw it. In the very center of the chamber where the dripping was loudest, where the air was thickest with that cloying, metallic sweetness, was an altar, or what looked like one. It wasn't empty. It pulsed faintly, a soft, rhythmic throb that mirrored the beat of my own terrified heart. It was waiting for me. With themselves. The meaning slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't tried to replace the house. They had tried to replace it. The entity, with their own lives, their own reflections, their own grief, to feed it, to appease it, to keep it from taking. What? And if replace it meant replacing me with another vessel for its endless hunger, what did my counter-design truly entail? Was I here to destroy it, or simply to offer myself as the next course in a meal that had already devoured my family? Replace it. If the entity, this thing, fed on grief and guilt, then the house wasn't just a prison. It was a carefully constructed larder designed to cultivate and harvest suffering. My ancestors hadn't been victims, they had been orchestrators or perhaps complicit tenders of the horror. The counter-design, it clicked into place with a sickening clarity. My own architectural mind, trained to see patterns, to understand flow and purpose, suddenly saw the house not as a structure of brick and mortar, but as a living diagram of despair. The hidden passages, the sealed-off rooms, the very orientation of the windows, they weren't random. They channeled something, directed it like a forced air system. The journal, then, wasn't a guide to a magical incantation. It was a blueprint for reversal. A way to starve the thing, to cut off its sustenance. My family's greatest sin, the one that had festered and brought down generations, wasn't just the creation of this monstrous legacy, but the repeated, deliberate cultivation of the very emotions that fed it. The trial was a cycle of forced grief, a ritualistic breaking of souls. My own family, my wife, my daughter. Their deaths hadn't been an accident, not entirely. They were the final, devastating harvest. A bitter wave of nausea rolled through me, but it was quickly subsumed by a cold, sharp resolve. I would not be another crop. I gripped the aged journal, its leather cover slick with the sweat of my palm. The pages I needed, the ones detailing the precise angles, the specific materials, the hidden conduits, they were etched in my memory now. I had studied them obsessively, trying to understand the house's underlying structure, not realizing I was learning the anatomy of a predator. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about banishing a ghost. It was about demolishing a system. The house seemed to sense my intent. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent like damp earth and something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood. I moved with purpose, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud on the parquet floor. I needed tools, not for demolition, not yet, but for precision, for redirection. I found what I needed in the old workshop off the kitchen, a rusted set of chisels, a mallet with a splintered handle, and a coil of thick insulated copper wire. I clenched my jaw. It was trying to break me, to feed on the fresh spike of grief. Not this time. My destination was the house's core, the nexus where the currents of despair converged, the place I had always instinctively avoided. I made my way through the labyrinthine passages, each step a deliberate act of defiance. The house fought back. Doors slammed shut behind me. Floorboards groaned under phantom weight. The temperature plummeted and my breath plumed in front of me. I pushed open a heavy, creaking door, revealing a narrow, descending staircase. The air here was still and stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something else, something indescribably ancient and hungry. This was it. The stairs ended abruptly, opening into a low-ceilinged passage. The air was thick with the metallic tang of rust and the cloying sweetness of decay. Water beaded on the exposed pipes overhead, occasionally letting go with a soft plink onto the stone floor. The corridor felt like a forgotten artery, leading deeper into the house's forgotten heart. The entity was here all around me, a palpable pressure, a suffocating presence. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting. I found the specific section detailed in the journal. A series of ancient, corroded pipes converging at a central point, surrounded by crumbling mortar. This was where the flow was concentrated. This was the throat of the beast. My task was to reroute it, to create a bypass, to starve it. I knew it was crude, perhaps foolish, but it was the only way I understood how to fight. Architectural defiance. I began to work, my movements precise despite the trembling in my hands. The mallet against the chisel chipped away at the old mortar. The sound reverberated, loud and jarring in the confined space. Each strike felt like a blow against the entity itself. A low hum started, vibrating through the stone beneath my feet, rising in pitch, a growl from the very foundations of the house. It expanded, stretched, a formless hunger, tendrils of blackness reaching for me. My breath hitched. I ignored it. I had to. I focused on the task, gritting my teeth, sweat stinging my eyes. The copper wire, a conduit for the counter-design, had to be threaded through a specific cavity I was carving, connecting 2 points, rerouting the flow of collected despair, sending it not to the entity, but somewhere else, away, to dissipate harmlessly into the earth, I hoped. With a final, desperate heave, I pushed the wire into place, securing it with a wedge of stone. The hum intensified, becoming a shriek, a sound that tore at the fabric of the air, assaulting my ears. I felt its icy tendrils brush against my cheek, a touch that promised eternal desolation. Had I done it? Had I truly severed its lifeline, or merely provoked a more profound, more immediate wrath? What would happen when a predator, long accustomed to an endless feast, found its sustenance suddenly cut off? The ringing in my ears was the last echo of a scream I wasn't sure was mine. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing the ravaged ballroom, swirling like a macabre snowstorm. The air, thick with the scent of old plaster and something acrid, burned in my lungs. I lay sprawled amidst the debris, a splintered table leg digging into my ribs, my head throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. Every muscle screamed in protest as I pushed myself up, my vision blurring for a moment before snapping back into focus. The ballroom was a ruin. The grand fireplace, once a gaping maw, was now a jagged wound in the wall, stones scattered across the floor like teeth. Chandeliers hung at grotesque angles, some having crashed down, their crystal shards glittering malevolently. One entire section of the ornate ceiling had caved in, revealing the raw, skeletal timbers beneath. It was as if the house itself had convulsed, trying to tear out its own heart, and perhaps it had. I stumbled, a searing pain shooting through my left ankle. I'd twisted it, or worse. The entity. I remembered the cold, the crushing weight, the whispers that had tried to burrow into my mind, dissecting every moment of my past, every pang of guilt. I remembered fighting back not with strength, but with a desperate, guttural refusal to break. What had I done? Had I driven it back, or merely bought myself a moment of reprieve? The silence that followed its retreat was more terrifying than its presence. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the cavernous space. I needed to move to get out of this open graveyard. It offered an escape, a hidden path. I limped towards it, each step a wince. My hand pressed against my side where a sharp impact had left a blossoming bruise. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, cramped passageway. The air here was damp, heavy, smelling faintly of mildew and rust. A relentless drip, drip, drip echoed from somewhere above, a maddening rhythm against the pulse in my temples. I moved slowly, my injured ankle protesting with every shuffle. I kept my back close to the wall, my senses on high alert. Was it truly gone, or merely biding its time in the deeper recesses of the house? The old custodian's words about my family's trial, and a counter-design clawed at the edges of my thoughts, more urgent now than ever. The corridor stretched on, a claustrophobic tunnel. I found myself thinking of the blueprints, the careful calculations, the elegant lines. My designs. This house in its grandeur had hidden these forgotten arteries, these places of unseen maintenance and decay. It was a metaphor for my family, for me. All the beautiful facades and beneath the rot. A sudden sharp clang echoed from deeper within the pipes, making me jump. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear. Was it just the building settling, or something else moving through its hidden veins? The drip, drip, drip continued, mocking my fear. I pushed on, determined not to be caught in the open again. My flashlight flickered again, then went out completely. Then a faint, sickly green glow emanated from further down the passage. Not a light source, but something phosphorescent, painted or stained on the wall. I moved towards it, driven by a morbid curiosity. As I drew closer, the glow resolved into a series of crudely drawn symbols, etched into the brick and then highlighted with the luminous pigment. They weren't architectural symbols, nor were they any language I recognized. They were intricate, angular, almost organic, like complex spiderwebs or twisted root systems. Beneath them, scratched deeply into the mortar, were dates. Old dates and names I recognized from my family tree. My grandfather's, his father's, my own name, or was it an ancestor's? The symbols pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible rhythm, a slow, steady thrum against the otherwise silent, dripping corridor. This wasn't just a maintenance shaft. This was a record, a warning. This was the counter-design, not a blueprint for a building, but a map of resistance and the trial. It wasn't a test of faith, but a desperate, bloody struggle against something ancient and insatiable. My family hadn't just lived here, they had been at war. My fingers traced the glowing lines, a sense of profound, terrifying understanding washing over me. The symbols, the dates, the names, they weren't just a history. They were a continuation. My name, Rajveer, etched among them. Was this my inheritance? Not just the house, but the fight. The entity didn't just feed on grief. It had been bound here, perhaps, by these very symbols, by the sacrifices of my ancestors. And now I had disrupted that fragile balance. The drip seemed to intensify, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the concrete. The symbols on the wall, once a revelation, now felt like a trap, drawing me further into something I couldn't comprehend. What exactly had my family done here, and what did it mean for me now that I had seen their secrets? I lay sprawled amidst the splintered floorboards, one hand pressed to my chest, feeling the ragged beat of my heart beneath my ribs. My eyes, wide and stinging, scanned the devastation. Tapestries hung in tatters. Chandeliers lay shattered. The grand fireplace was a gaping maw, black and empty, its mantelpiece reduced to rubble. The acrid smell, it wasn't just plaster. It was something metallic, sharp like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with the faint, cloying sweetness of rot. It clung to the air, to my clothes, to the back of my throat. But beneath it all, a strange silence had settled. The low thrumming that had been a constant companion in the house, the whispers at the edge of hearing, the oppressive weight, it was gone, replaced by an emptiness that felt both terrifying and profoundly liberating. I pushed myself up, a groan escaping my lips. My body ached, every muscle protesting, but a new kind of clarity had settled over me. Resolve. I had faced it. I had screamed back, and something for now had retreated. My gaze fell upon a section of wall near the grand staircase. It wasn't a natural break. It looked like a section of the wall had been designed to pivot, only now it hung askew. Curiosity, a dangerous old friend, pulled me towards it. I saw a narrow gap, a passage that seemed to descend into the foundations of the house itself. I hesitated for only a moment. This house had swallowed my family, consumed my peace, fed on my guilt. There was nowhere left to run, no deeper hell it could drag me into that I hadn't already touched. I squeezed through the jagged opening, the rough plaster scraping my shoulder. The passage was tight, unlit, and smelled of mildew. It led downwards, a winding, uneven descent. Then, the passage opened into a larger space, a utilitarian artery beneath the grandeur I'd known. I stood in a service corridor, pipes dripping, no cameras. The raw, exposed concrete walls were stained with rust and grime. Overhead, a tangle of thick pipes, some wrapped in decaying insulation, snaked across the ceiling, their joints weeping slow, fat drops of water that splattered onto the concrete floor with monotonous regularity. There were no windows, no light fixtures, just the bare concrete and the labyrinthine plumbing. This was the hidden skeleton of the house, the part never meant to be seen. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, revealing strange, almost architectural etchings on some of the pipes themselves, symbols that looked familiar, like corrupted versions of drafting marks. Then my light caught something else. Set into the concrete wall, almost flush, was a small bronze plaque. It was tarnished, green with age, but its raised script was still legible. I knelt, wiping away the dust with a trembling hand. Architectus animus domus, custos vincula. Architect of the house soul, guardian, my ancestors, not just builders but jailers or perhaps creators. The acrid smell intensified down here, mingling with a faint, buzzing vibration that I felt more in my teeth than in my ears. This wasn't just a house. It was a mechanism, a containment. My father, my grandfather, all of them, they hadn't just built structures, they had built this. A prison designed to harness and hold whatever malevolence lurked here, feeding on the very grief and guilt that had consumed my family for generations. My own house fire, the one I designed, the one that took my family. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was an escape, an opening. The entity had found a way out, or perhaps a way to lure me back, to the source, to its heart, and I, an architect, was the latest in the line. The inheritor of not just the property, but the responsibility. The house didn't want to destroy me, not entirely. It wanted me to maintain it, to feed it, perhaps, or to keep it bound. My family's legacy wasn't just blueprints and foundations. It was this grim, unending vigil. There was a faint line, a seam that my fingers traced, a hidden panel. Inside, nestled on a block of stone, was a single heavy iron key, its teeth intricate and rusted. Beside it, a worn, leather-bound journal. The journal was filled with sketches, architectural diagrams unlike anything I'd ever seen, arcane symbols intertwined with structural plans, notes on channels of sorrow and conduits of despair. And finally, a clear, precise diagram of the house's core, a section of the main load-bearing wall in the deepest part of the foundation. A section labeled the binding point. The instructions were stark. The chains weaken with neglect. The guardian must reinforce, not with blood but with intent, with the will to contain. My hands tightened around the journal. The entity thrived on chaos, on unrestrained grief. It had consumed my family, nearly consumed me, but I had pushed back. I had found its prison. I understood now. I couldn't destroy the house without unleashing something far worse. My purpose wasn't to escape this place, but to become its keeper, to become the architect of its confinement. I stood up, the iron key heavy in my palm. I had a choice. I could leave, abandon this accursed legacy, and let whatever was bound here eventually break free to plague another generation, another family, or I could embrace my inheritance, not of wealth but of responsibility. I had been consumed by guilt for so long, a passive victim. Now I had a task, a grim, terrifying, but clear purpose. I would become the custos. I turned back towards the passage leading to the ballroom, the key gripped tight. The house was quiet, too quiet, but I knew its heart still beat. What would the house demand of its new guardian?